conversation with Congress leader Manish Tiwari, also a Lok Sabha MP, and of course one of the very articulate voices in Parliament. And Manish, we are on the eve of a very important Parliament session. We've got the budget, we've got, of course, the handling of the farmers' protests, handling of COVID, but the opposition seems to be setting it off on a very stormy note by saying we're going to boycott the president's address totally. Is that the right note to go ahead with?
First of all, Priya, thank you for those kind words, and it's always a pleasure to be on your show. It's one of the more informative, tranquil shows which are still available in the very noisy and vociferous space that television has become. But be that as it may, the fact remains that there has been consistent and constant mishandling of everything by the government. And there has been this cussed insistence on not listening to any voice of reason or rationale. For example, the economic mismanagement, since this is the budget session, the economic mismanagement didn't begin yesterday. You can't blame it on COVID-19. It began when you demonetized the Indian economy in 2016. It's been a downhill ride ever since then. Even before COVID-19, the economy was in a deep crisis. You saw the finance minister between the July of 2019 and the December of 2019 present 4 different versions of our budget. Budget 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. You never knew as to whether the government was coming or going on the economy. And then you had this complete draconian lockdown. And the only thing it flattened was the economic curve and not the disease curve. Coupled with that,
I talked to, they of course point to the IMF figures, which are showing that whatever it is, despite the government, I would say there is a recovery. I mean, yes, I agree. We went down from slowdown to lockdown, but there seems to be some kind of a recovery. That how does the opposition deal with that when you're taking?
We are very happy if there's a recovery. I mean, after all, if the Indian economy grows, we would be the happiest people. Let's not forget the fact that we are the guys who kept the economy at 8% year on year for 10 long years, despite the great economic meltdown, despite the Eurozone crisis, and despite all the headwinds with regard to oil prices. These people have not faced any of that in the last 6.5 years. And despite that, the economy has been in a death spiral. And coupled with that, you have the situation with regard to China. I mean, it's been now 9 months that the Chinese have transgressed into our borders. This government has put a complete information squeeze and is extremely stingy with sharing information with regard to what is happening on the border. And I think the time has come for Parliament to have a full-fledged discussion on the situation Hue China. And then, of course, you have those very infamous or notorious WhatsApp chats, without going into the criminality of it, which, of course, a court of law in Maharashtra will decide upon. I think it raises certain very serious questions with regard to national security, and there needs to be a thorough investigation into it. So therefore,
opposition going to ask for one. I know Rahul Gandhi has asked for that, but on Parliament,
we've asked for a joint parliamentary committee, Priya. So therefore, we obviously would want the entire thing to be investigated extenso, because it has severe implications for our democracy. If national security was allegedly milked for electoral purposes or in order to further electoral agendas, as those WhatsApp chats, which of course have now been authenticated and filed in a court of law as a part of a supplementary charge sheet by the Mumbai police. If all that is correct, it has extremely serious implications for our democracy. So therefore, it's not only about as to, who leaked the information, but more importantly, as to how cynically something as horrendous as the killing of 40 odd security personnel in one of the most dastardly terror attacks that we have seen, rather than actually focusing upon a coherent and a serious response. The entire mind frame seemed to have been distracted as to how it would play out electorally. So therefore, you see, these are extremely serious issues which cannot be swept away under the carpet.
Fair enough, but in those WhatsApp chats, it's only the two who are talking, the BARC CEO and the journalist. It's not really any of the political people, and I assume that would really be a target for raising these issues, who are implicated in any way. We just have, they're really third-party hearsay.
Well, as I said, there are three aspects to it. First of all, I am personally and absolutely against any private conversations being picked upon by third parties. So therefore, had this been chats which would have been leaked in the usual course of things, I don't think anybody would have paid attention to it. But the reason why they drew attention was because the Mumbai police decided to file them as a part of an additional charge sheet. So obviously, it's become now an official court document, and some of those alleged revelations are not so much about as to who provided that particular information, which is germane, but the entire context and the tenor of it, which seems to suggest that the calculations were cynically political rather than being motivated by issues of national security.
Fair enough. And the whole larger game plan of, manipulating TRPs for commercial gain. That's, also.
Well, that's
you are familiar. You've dealt with this as minister.
We had a whole 20-minute conversation with regard to that. And I firmly think that the Broadcast Audience Research Council, unfortunately, has lost complete credibility. And so therefore, the television industry will have to search for a new paradigm as to how would they want to measure or benchmark the ratings of their shows, because essentially that is the currency which then gets used in order to funnel advertising money your way. And if there is a larger problem of revenue models, etc. But you see, that's the criminal aspect of it is or will be gone into by a court of law, because now it is formally before the court in the form of a charge sheet. But it's the other aspect of it which is extremely worrying. And I said it is not so much about who said what and who did what, but rather the larger context, which I think has implications and serious implications on our democracy.
Fair enough. And now, Manish, I'd like you to focus on three main topics in particular. Of course, one being China, the other being the farmers' protest, and the third being expectations from the budget, because that's going to be the first thing that Parliament will take up next week.
Well, the thing is, in the first leg of Parliament, I don't think there is going to be very much of time. As I understand the parliamentary calendar, so 29th you have, that is tomorrow, you have the President's address. Then you have Saturday and Sunday, and on Monday you have the budget. Then I think 3 days are being allocated to the reply to the President's address. After that, there will be a general discussion on the budget, for three more days. So effectively, that takes you to about 10th of February, and then there are not many days which are left. So I think a lot of the substantive part of what needs to be discussed will get articulated both during the reply to the President's address and the reply to the budget in the first leg of the budget session. And some of the standalone issues, obviously would either be raised when we are done with these two things, which I guess is a statutory requirement in the remaining time which is left on the first leg of the budget session.
Fair enough. The farmers' protest first, Manish, you've been talking a lot about it, and that is also the reason why the opposition parties are boycotting the President's address, saying that, the way the laws were passed and also the handling on Republic Day, they also raised that as an issue in the letter that they wrote to the President. What is I know the Congress is supporting the farmers. The government is saying that, this is just a 2.5 state protest. All the farmers are not behind it, etc., etc. And they're blaming the farmers' unions for the happenings on Republic Day also.
Well, let's rewind back to the beginning. First of all, at a point in time when this government should have been fighting COVID 19, they decided to go after the farmers through this ill conceived and half baked ordinance. What was the tearing hurry to ram these ordinances through when your focus should have been on combating COVID 19? And incidentally, I think one more issue which will be flagged is with regard to the efficacy of one of the vaccines. I think that's an extremely germane issue because phase 3 results have not really come in, and the vaccine is being administered. So therefore, to go back to the farmers' protest, if the government wouldn't have then rammed it through in the manner in which they did, especially in the Rajya Sabha, they would have they are listening to the voice of sanity and reason. They would have referred it to a standing committee. The standing committee would have called all the stakeholders, evolved some kind of a modus vivendi, and then this could have been done in an amicable manner. And even after that, when the farmers started protesting, you refused to absolutely talk to them. They were sitting in Punjab and Haryana, Western Uttar Pradesh, parts of Rajasthan for the better part of 2.5 months before they decided to come to Delhi. Only when they came and besieged Delhi, that is when you opened a dialogue with them. And there also, you were just kind of stringing them along. You were not serious at all. The government wasn't serious at all. It is only when the Supreme Court intervened and showed sensitivity and stayed the laws, that the government said, oh, we are prepared to put it in abeyance for 1.5 years. What was the rationale of that offer once the laws had been stayed by the Supreme Court? So therefore, the government has never been serious in its intent with regard to listening or to be sensitive to the concerns of the farmers. And what happened on the Republic Day was extremely unfortunate. I do not think anybody should be allowed to take law into their own hands. But then a fringe cannot really take away from the legitimacy of a protest in which lakhs and lakhs of farmers, women and children, braving the cold and COVID-19 have been participating in for the past 2 months.
You feel that there is a move to give this movement a religious flavor. It's a farmers versus government, but to make it a Sikhs versus government, I don't know, whoever's doing it, whichever vested interest, that is not what the movement was. Religion was never part of it, but to hoist the Nishan Sahib, to come down as a thing of just farmers from Punjab is also to create a religious divide in the movement.
Well, it has very serious implications. At some point in time, we can talk in greater detail about it. But as I said, you cannot, see, when you collect so many people, and this was not an agitation by an organized political party, which has, to a very, very substantive extent, control over its cadres. Here there were a bunch of organizations which had come together for a common cause, who decided to mobilize people who possibly never even realized the extent of insecurity these farm laws had created. For example, in the 13,000 odd villages of Punjab, I don't think there was a single village which did not send 2 or 3 tractors to the protest. So, that is the extent of, and I think the same is true about Haryana and parts of Western Uttar Pradesh. So if the government says that this is a 2.5 state protest and they would like to wait for it to become a pan-India movement, then they can be our guests. Then they'll have something so big that even if they try their best and even if they then say that we are going to repeal those laws, it is not going to end. The government must realize that Punjab is a border state. Punjab, unfortunately, has had a history of a very bloody partition, and B, then 15 years of militancy. You have Jammu and Kashmir, especially Kashmir, which still continues to be destabilized. You have the northern border where the Chinese have transgressed into our territory, and Punjab contributes 7.7% to the Indian Army and correspondingly to the Air Force and the Navy, together the entire Western region, which accounts for only 7.78% of the India's population, contributes over 21% to our armed forces. And these are figures which the government has given to Parliament, I think, in the November or December of 2019. So therefore, they must realize that they recruit from the same stock, which is now sitting on the, or has been sitting on the borders of Delhi. And if you think by invoking draconian laws like the UAPA or leveling sedition charges, you will be able to break the movement. I think the government is absolutely mistaken. The insecurity which these farm laws have created and the manner in which they have rammed through without any consultations, the impact has gone down very deep.
What would be the thinking, Manish, before we take a break? Because BJP's never had a foothold in Punjab. Is that why they're saying, "Chalo, forget Punjab"? That was never ours anyway. They gamble with their oldest ally also. Why would they take such a gamble?
Well, it beats me absolutely because it is completely obtuse. There was no reason for these farm laws at all, because anybody who would have studied the constitutional development of India, the first 15 amendments to the Indian Constitution between 1950 and 1965 were essentially in order to implement agrarian reforms. And one of the biggest agrarian reforms which was implemented was to give land to the tiller. And here you want to take away the land from the tiller in the name of contract farming, hand it over to the oligarchs and the sheballs. And I do not think that people of this region who have resisted every invader who came down the Khyber Pass between the 10th and the 18th century are going to roll over and play dead.
Conversation with Congress MP Manish Tiwari, and also, as I was saying, one of the articulate speakers in Parliament, and that's really where the Congress is now going to, take up the government. At least, we've been waiting a long time for this moment. There was no session in July, the Congress. So now there's a whole lot of issues that you will raise, but as you said, there's not going to be enough time. China is one thing that I see Rahul Gandhi is very preoccupied with. He talks a lot about that, and you've been writing a lot about that also. What is your real fear? Is it, are we lulled by, as you were lulled in 62? Do you think China will attack once, maybe in April, May is what people are fearing? What would be your advice?
Well, I do not know what the Chinese game plan is. But one thing I definitely do know, that in 1962, when the Chinese attack took place, the Jansangh was a 4-member political party in Parliament. And one of those members was late Prime Minister Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And Mr. Vajpayee went and asked Prime Minister Nehru that there must be a debate in Parliament with regard to China. And Prime Minister Nehru immediately acceded. And if I remember correctly, between the 7th of November to the 15th or the 16th of November 1962, while the war with China was going on, Parliament discussed the China issue threadbare. Unfortunately, Mr. Vajpayee, when he was Prime Minister during Kargil, did not acquiesce to a discussion on what was happening. But to be very fair to him, he at least allowed the media to cover what was going on without any let or hindrance. This government has put a complete information squeeze with regard to what is happening on the border. There are only sanitized driblets which actually are allowed to come out in the public domain, which really don't give you a full picture. So therefore, the time has come 8 or 9 months later for the government to take Parliament into confidence and really be absolutely upfront and candid with regard to what is happening on the border.
But do you think they will? Do you feel that the government has even acknowledged the problem? In the last session also, it took a while before I think the defense minister finally uttered the word China. Otherwise, the Prime Minister didn't mention that in the Red Fort speech at all also.
There seems to be a strange diffidence in calling a spade a spade. But the fact is that there are intrusions, and there are intrusions into what is what is Indian territory in terms of our perception of the line of actual control. Now, either the government should turn around and say, well, that is not what our perception of the line of actual control is. If they really have the conviction of courage, because they've been waffling all along, saying this is all because the border is undemarcated. Well, the border's been undemarcated going all the way back to the late 19th century. In fact, the British made the first attempt in order to try and demarcate the northern border. They were not successful. They made another attempt in the early 20th century to demarcate the eastern border, the McMahon line. Again, they were not successful. So therefore, this border has not been unsettled as of yesterday. This border has been unsettled for more than a century. But you had skillful players who were able to manage these contradictions and not make them an inflection point. In fact, after 1962, except for 1975, the incident where some of our Assam Rifles people were shot by the Chinese. It was called Tunglokla or something. And then the Samundruk Chu incident in 1986, where we actually stared the Chinese down. The Sino-Indian border has been fairly stable. In fact, it's become largely unstable after this government took office, notwithstanding the informal summits in Wuhan and Mamlapuram.
How do you see Biden's presidency, keeping in mind, vis-a-vis India? How do you see that?
Well, I hope President Biden is a magnanimous man, that he lets Abki Bar Trump Sarkar to just fall by the wayside. I think there couldn't have been something more obtuse than that, going and trying to interfere in somebody's internal democratic processes. President Biden is a seasoned person, has spent a long time in the US Senate, has been vice president of the United States of America for 8 years. So I hope he is able to take all this in his stride and keep the larger strategic picture of the Indo-Pacific in view, and really sort of measure the relationship with those benchmarks. Because honestly, I think some of the stuff that we did leading up to the US elections, no sensible person or no sensible country would have ever done.
Fair enough. And you mentioned the vaccine also, Manish. Are you, talking about the apprehensions voiced by the scientific community in giving the clearance to the Bharat Biotech vaccine without
Absolutely,
phase 3
because you see,
trials?
there are serious concerns which the medical fraternity has raised. Very eminent doctors have talked about the fact that without phase 3 data, these vaccines should not have been made a part of a mass immunization program. So why did it happen? You have the subjects expert committee saying one thing on one day and then doing a 360-degree turn and allowing the vaccine to go forth for emergency use, which is something that I have never understood. I can imagine a drug, a palliative, being licensed for emergency use. Like, for example, suppose you've run out of options and, the patient is about to die. The only thing left is to try and experiment with something which has been only tested to that an extent. That is understandable. But how can a vaccine really be licensed for emergency use? This is supposed to be a preemptive. It is supposed to be an immunization against the disease. So, the whole thing is really murky, if I can use that word. And we unfortunately seem to have been carried away in this entire specter of vaccine nationalism.
As with everything, I mean, you have to prove your nationalism, whether it is a vaccine or whether it is, anything else. I think that's part of the test this government puts us through every day. In fact, it's very interesting because I get messages from doctors saying the first time we're hearing politicians telling doctors, go ahead, this vaccine is good for you. Usually it's the other way around. But
well, it's the interesting thing is, Priya, that since you mention it, in every other country, politicians have led by example. Joe Biden was among the first to take the vaccine. Vice President Kamala Harris took the vaccine. Their senators and congressmen took the vaccine. In Great Britain, the Prime Minister and even the Queen, who's the constitutional head, took the vaccine. In other nations, leaders did the same. But in India, no politician, no senior functionary of the government volunteered to take the shot first. I mean, it would have created a hell of a lot of confidence if somebody senior in government would have said that, all right, fine, here I lead by example and I will be the first person to take the shot. And when I flagged it, they said, well, certain very eminent doctors have done so. But why is it that other liberal democracies in the world did not put their doctors in the front line in order to become examples for the rest of the country, but they became examples themselves? They led by example. And this is something which has been sorely missing in this government, that when it comes to providing leadership on critical issues, which have a larger national import and are not just electorally relevant, you suddenly find that leadership going missing.
The risk of being trolled, Manish, I'm going to totally agree with you on this, because, I've not seen anyone with more capital, the credible capital, than our Prime Minister. He tells us, go and, Bartan Bajao, we do that. Anything he says, we do. So if he had taken the vaccine, it would have sent a very strong message. On that point, I totally agree with you. But thank you, Manish, for talking to us and for this conversation.
Thank you very much, Priya. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.